End Time is the first in a series of 3 new heroic-only dungeons coming out in patch 4.3. With Nosdermo's help, you'll do a bit of time traveling as you seek out the Dragon Soul. For this dungeon, your aim is to defeat 3 bosses, the first 2 of which are random. The 4 possible bosses you'll encounter are the Echoes of Baine, Jaina, Sylvanas, and Tyrande, now shades of their former selves having been twisted by the passage of time. The final boss is Murozond, a corrupted dragon holding time hostage and preventing Nosdermo from going into the past to the time of the Sundering. When you first enter the instance, you'll find yourself in an almost unrecognizable dragon blight left in ruin, and Nosdermo waiting to help. Use the teleporter to travel to your first random boss. After you arrive in the Obsidian Dragon Shrine, make sure that all of your party members have teleported in and are together before moving forward. Accidentally pulling this trash will not be pleasant, especially if you get more than 1 dragon. It is possible to avoid this trash entirely by traveling down the center area. Just watch the pathing of the trash. If you have some party members that seem less able to avoid the trash, try taking out the ones on the left, and then you'll have a wider path towards the Echo of Baine. You may notice that as you pass through the lava, you'll get a buff called Molten Fists that lasts 20 seconds and causes melee attacks to inflict about 10k additional fire damage. Melee can try sidestepping into the lava for the buff periodically if they are so inclined. Before you pull, try to spread out so that there are some people on each platform, because later on Baine will cast Pulverize, which does 30k physical damage to enemies within 15 yards and destroys a nearby platform. Having people separated at the start means that fewer people will have to swim through the lava to a new platform. Typically, ranged are positioned on the lower 2 platforms, while the melee and tank are together on the upper platform. If you get disoriented by getting knocked into the lava, try turning off water collision in the interface camera settings. Baine will also throw totems at random party members that do about 60k physical damage and will knock them back. I've found that my favorite spot is on the tip of this platform, because if you're knocked back from this point, there's a good chance you won't land in the lava. The totem will persist on the ground for 20 seconds, and if you click on it, you can then target an area and throw it back at Baine. After being hit by a totem, Baine will be stunned, receive 5% of his maximum health as damage, and he'll take 50% increased damage for 20 seconds. When Baine touches the lava, he'll gain a buff as well that adds about 10k extra fire damage to his melee attacks, called Molten Axe. While he has the Molten Axe buff, he will cast Molten Blast on the tank, which does about 10k fire damage on impact and then about 10k every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. This can and should be dispelled right away, as he will continue to buff himself with it until Molten Axe wears off. Keep up with the dispels and totem throws and you'll find Baine is no trouble at all. Once he is defeated, head back to the portal and travel to the next random boss. The Echo of Jaina awaits you in the Azure Dragon Shrine, requiring you to collect fragments of her staff before she appears. These fragments are scattered around the area and often are in the way of the trash packs. It's important to make sure that you at least clear the trash in the area that Jaina spawns, since during the fight Jaina will often blink around. If she blinks close enough to the trash, she will end up pulling them for you, which you definitely don't want to happen. Trash packs consist of priests, sorceresses, soldiers, and hunters. Go after the healer first, and be sure to attack the light wells he casts. The sorceress should be targeted next, followed by either the soldier or the hunter. Once all fragments are collected, Jaina will spawn. Throughout the fight, she will throw flare cores on the ground, which will explode when touched and will cause a light fire damage to all players within 5 yards. However, if you don't detonate it, it will explode on its own after 10 seconds and will inflict about 90k fire damage to everyone in the party. So remember to run immediately to a flare core as soon as you can to get rid of it. She will also summon 3 frost blades, which will travel on the line along the ground. If you get in the way of a frost blade, you will be stunned and ice blocked. Jaina casts Frostbolt volleys as well, which inflicts 15 to 20k frost damage and slows enemies by 30% for 4 seconds. She will also pyroblast her current target for about 45k fire damage and leaves a burning dot. Avoid the frost blades and detonate the flare cores to ensure an easy victory. Once the Echo of Jaina is defeated, head back to the teleporter and proceed to the next random boss. As you enter the Ruby Dragon Shrine, you'll notice a path leading you towards the Echo of Sylvanas. The path is also inhabited by time-twisted scourge and geists who spread a nasty disease called cadaver toss, which hits their target for 12.5k and then ticks for about 14k every 3 seconds for 12 seconds. The geists can also heal themselves with Cannibalize, which has a 10-second cast time, but it can be interrupted. The Sylvanas encounter has a raid-wiping ability that we should talk about first. It's called Sacrifice, and does about 300k shadow damage to all players within 10 yards of Sylvanas when one of her risen ghouls reaches her. Sylvanas will begin casting the Calling of the Highborn, and will rise up off the ground, pull everyone in the group to her, and summon 8 risen ghouls to come to her aid. The ghouls form a collective link followed by a shadowy haze that slowly creeps towards the center. If you cross the link and stand in the purple shadows, you'll be afflicted by racking pain that does about 35k damage every second you stand in it. Melee should be aware of this and make sure to stand in front of the ghoul and not behind or to the side. If you don't make it out of the center by the time a ghoul reaches Sylvanas, you will die. How you're supposed to defeat this mechanic is by focus firing on one of the ghouls. Once one ghoul is dead, their link is broken, and a path will clear for you to escape by. I noticed that after a few attempts, the ghouls seem to spawn from the same spots. To make it easier on yourselves, you can try putting down a raid marker where one will spawn and tell everyone to focus fire on that ghoul as soon as they appear. When you first pull Sylvanas, ranged players should spread out by at least 10 yards. Throughout the fight, Sylvanas will send forth black arrows which deal about 60k shadow damage to players within 10 yards of a random target. She will also use Unholy Shot, which deals about 30k shadow damage to a random target and applies a shadow debuff that ticks for about 25k every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. Unholy Shot will also hit up to 3 players standing within 10 yards of the target. Additionally, she will cast Blighted Arrows, which will first corrupt the ground beneath a party member with shadows that do about 35k damage a second and slow any player standing in it by 50%. Once her blighted arrows land, they will do about 50k shadow damage and knock the player back. Periodically, she will also debuff someone with Shriek of the Highborn, which does about 75k damage on a random player and slows them by 50% for 30 seconds. This can and should be dispelled. Rinse and repeat and you'll make short work of the Echo of Sylvanas. After teleporting to the Emerald Dragon Shrine, you'll be plunged into shadows and find the Echo of Tyrande kneeling in a pool of dark moonlight. Before you approach her, however, you must defeat time-twisted Nightsabers and Sentinels. While these creatures are in the darkness, they have a buff called In Shadow that reduces their incoming damage by 90%. However, once they are brought within the beams of moonlight, they lose the buff and are easily defeated. Your goal is to go from Moonbeam to Moonbeam, killing Nightsabers and Sentinels at each stop. If you don't finish them before a Moonbeam dies out, don't worry, the ats don't do too much damage. Just move to the next Moonbeam and finish them there. Once you complete this gauntlet, you'll see Tyrande enveloped by a beam of dark moonlight. Standing in the pool around her will slow spellcasting speed by 50%, so spellcasters should make sure to stand outside of it. She will start the fight by casting Moonbolts, which do about 40k arcane damage on her current target. She also throws Stardust on the entire group, which does about 50k arcane damage to all. Moonlance will travel along the ground in a line that splits into 3 parts. It does about 50k arcane damage, stuns them for 5 seconds, and is dispellable. Try to avoid those. Once Tyrande is at 80% health, she calls out for Elun's help and receives a 25% spellcasting speed buff called Lunar Guidance. She will receive another stack of this buff once she hits 55% health. She also summons 2 Eyes of the Goddess, which cannot be attacked and that travel around the perimeter of the dark pool. Every second they emit about 50k arcane damage to players within 6 yards and silences them for 5 seconds. I found that instead of trying to outpace them, it's easier to simply go around them. At 30% health, Tyrande will cry out one last time for assistance from the Moon Goddess, and Tears of Elun will rain down on players, inflicting about 30k damage in a 4-yard radius. Dodge the tears, avoid the Moonlance, and run around the eyes for the remainder of the fight. Once you have conquered 2 of the 4 random bosses, you will have access to the final encounter, Murozond. The first thing that you may notice as you step into the Bronze Dragon Shrine is the giant hourglass sitting in the middle. This hourglass will be clickable once the fight begins and is key to successfully defeating the dragon. But first you need to take care of the trash packs that patrol the area. The tornadoes you see roaming about are currently harmless, but I would not be surprised if this was changed in the future. This trash isn't that exciting and they don't do much damage, so let's move forward to Murozond. Before you pull, make sure that at least one other person understands the hourglass mechanic. The Hourglass of Time casts Rewind Time on all players when clicked, restoring health and mana, bringing dead players to life, and resetting all cooldowns. The Hourglass only has 5 charges, so it's best to spread them out throughout the fight. One way to break down Rewind Time is by clicking on the hourglass once Murozond reaches 80, 65, 50, 35, and then 20% health. These numbers are not strict, and you may need to change them on the fly if your tank dies. Remember that if players die, they will be resurrected after time is rewound, so don't panic. Since all your cooldowns are reset, you can bloodlust and use raid cooldowns each time. Remember that mana is fully restored as well, so you can really go to town and burn this dragon down. While you're gleefully spamming Arcane Blast like there's no tomorrow, remember to not stand in the distortion bombs that Murozond launches at random players. Once they land, they inflict 25k arcane damage and leave a pool of temporal distortion 8 yards wide that will do 25k additional damage every second to anyone standing in it. As the battle goes on, many distortion pools will accumulate on the ground. Fortunately, Rewind Time will remove those too. Throughout the fight, Murozond debuffs players with Temporal Blast that does 25 arcane damage and increases their arcane damage taken by 10% for 20 seconds. This does stack. Fortunately, Rewind Time removes that as well. Like most dragons, Murozond does have a Tail Swipe and a Nasty Breath that does about 75k shadow damage, so be mindful of those as you're dancing around the distortion bombs. The Breath has a surprisingly large cone, so be sure to stay safely behind her front claws. Along the way, Nosdormo helpfully buffs players with Blessing of the Bronze Dragonflight, which increases melee, ranged, and spellcasting speed by 40% and movement speed by 40% as well. As long as your group understands the hourglass and stays out of temporal distortions, you should enjoy an easy kill with fun mechanics. After Murozond is defeated, Nosdormo will be ready to guide you to the next step in retrieving the Dragon's Soul, the Well of Eternity. I hope you enjoyed this guide to End Time. If you'd like to discuss this encounter, please head over to the LearntoRaid forums via the link below. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube, watch us on Twitch TV, and follow us on Twitter. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.
I wasn't feeling so good. I just didn't feel like playing anymore. So I went home, and I got all comfy and cozy and all scrunched up in front of my phonograph. And I sat there and I closed my eyes and listened to all the sweet